It is not about the story. This argument is used to defend games that have an absolute lackluster story or none at all, and is a justification of an idiotic level so high there is no rope long enough to hang it. In the gaming scene, there's an argument about storytelling where the story is absolutely lackluster or non-existent to try to paint a game in a more positive light. There are very few times when this argument holds weight in gaming, and requires the focus to be on gameplay and mechanics to be so enjoyable the story doesn't ever enter the minds of players, because when it does, the entire charade falls apart. Perfect examples of this being pulled off well is Rainbow Six Siege and Minecraft. Bear with me. These games make sure that the story is not the focus, and as such, aren't marketed that way, and with enjoyable mechanics, the player is kept content with content. Other games, like MMOs and VR chat, pull off the you make your own story to keep people hooked, but still need the same care to pull off well. Many games, though, try to pull this off and fail horribly. These usually stem from two no's you should know. Is the story interesting? And is the world interesting? These questions are interlinked and both must be answered if one is presented to the player. These both questions nearly cover half of the presentation of the other. You may have an amazing or interesting story, but if the setting or presentation is depressing and boring, you may as well be telling a story about watching your dogs, and vice versa. If these questions are asked, your entire game could fall apart. If they come back as no's for either one, your game is already 2 feet, 3 feet deep. Games that bring up these two questions and don't answer them well face a very common defense. It's not about the story! A recent and popular example of this is with the catastrophe of Destiny 1 and 2 stories. Fans defend this critique with that the focus is not on the story. Also, Destiny will be used as a popular example, but this goes for others, Battlefield, Call of Theses, The Division, etc. However, what they fail to realize is that one of the questions was answered. Is the world interesting? Which immediately prompts a response for question uno. Is the story interesting? The story for both games was terrible at a gracious level and mediocre at best for the nearly 4 years that this game has existed. Therefore, no. It wasn't. World building and the world itself took a hit since half of the way it was presented was non-existent and having to rely on graphics and gameplay to keep it vibrant. This also can explain why people would get bored with Destiny 2 more than Destiny 1 because the gameplay became inferior in Destiny 2 and it only exacerbated the problem that the story already had. Returning back on topic. If your game has no story and asks one of the two questions, you have immediately lost a way to retain players. Part of the quote-unquote experience of games are to immerse you in a world, but in order to do that, you need something to drive said immersion. Normally this is done through story and gameplay, but if a story isn't present, or not the focus, you've just lost half of your retention. Want a movie example? Ask Mr. Bay. You can change these three words, world, story, and gameplay, but when you sever one part, the others usually collapse in on themselves. This is why you have games like No Man's Sky flop so horribly, ignoring false advertisement for a minute. No story, worlds were repetitive, and the gameplay was lackluster to some. Same thing applies to The Division. No story, boring world, yet fun gameplay. Destiny has no story, an interesting world, and good mechanics for the most part. What you determine as good is as subjective as saying Siege is better than Overwatch, fight me, so people will find these three traits different on quality for each individual game. Now you may be saying, what about Battlefield, Call of Duty, and Warframe? Those don't have stories and everybody loves them. First, Warframe does have a story. Second, Battlefield and Call of Duty have this certain cheat when it comes to story of their games. Their world doubles as the story. Battlefield and Call of Duty, other games as well, can use historical events or a historical time period to build a story out of a pre-existing one. The story of World War I, or II, or Vietnam. That's one reason why fans of Call of Duty like quote-unquote boots on the ground. Not so much as being on the ground per se, but the setting required for that is in a place they can relate to. Now, changing the rules and laws of said world need to be given an utmost caution, especially based on real events. If developers aren't careful on how they implement new storytelling mechanics or features into a game, the player would interpret the world and story as whatever the developers want, so they won't care about it. That's why females representing frontline soldiers for the United Kingdom in World War II can spark outrage. And a story writer telling people that their entire library was folklore could cause a dubious volley of hate to come their way. Stories are integral to keep people entertained, and if there wasn't any, you'd be soft to games with a plot. Get it? You would be soft? You be soft? I would love to hear your justifications for no story in the comments, so please leave them. I'm Ash Awesome. Adios.